Hello, and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this section, we're going over beauty techniques in Photoshop, and in this video, we'll be going over hair selection and retouching. Hair is known for being extremely difficult to work with. The difficulty doesn't come from solid patches of hair, but from these tiny individual strands that like to stray out from the rest of the hair, fraying into the background. If you're trying to edit hair, it can be very hard to select these individual strands without also selecting the background surrounding them. In a previous tutorial, I went over how to erase a background from behind hair, which can be a helpful technique for isolating hair, but it's limited in the sense that it's a destructive process. It doesn't actually select all the hairs, it just deletes the background behind them so you can replace it with something else. However, in this tutorial, I'll show you how to isolate hair in such a way that you can select and manipulate it as much as you like without having to unnecessarily destroy any part of your image. The first step is to select the hair itself. Now, traditionally, this would be the hardest part of working with hair, as it can be extremely tedious to select each strand individually. So I'll show you the fastest and most accurate way I know to select and manipulate hair. I'm going to go over to the Tools panel and equip the Quick Selection tool. Then I'll start selecting her hair. And it's okay to go a little too far with my selection, just as long as all the hair is selected. And I'm going to make sure to include all these little strands that fray out from the rest of the hair. And if I need to subtract from my selection, I can just press and hold the Alt key on my keyboard or Option key on the Mac and click and drag to deselect areas that I don't want to be selected. So far, I have the hair on the left side of her face selected. It's a pretty rough selection. There's a few areas around the hair that I don't want to be selected. This is especially noticeable in the background. Normally, this is why hair is so notoriously difficult to work with. I'll show you how to fix this once I have the rest of the hair selected. I'll just move on to including the hair on the right side of her face in my selection. Again, just trying to include all the hair that I can. Now it's okay to select a little too much background, but I want to avoid selecting her face if I can. So I'll keep the Alt or Option key in mind if I want to remove anything from my selection. Okay, That's about as good as I can get this selection using the Quick Selection tool. As you can see, there are still plenty of areas besides the hair still being selected. Usually, this would mean that my selection would be worthless. But I'll show you how to turn this into a great selection that can then be used to apply any sort of effect we want. With my selection still active, I'll go up to the Tool options and click the Refine Edge button. Now the Refine Edge dialog box is open. I've used Refine Edge quite a lot in previous tutorials, and I usually end up playing with these sliders till the selection looks nice and crisp. But in this tutorial, I probably won't have to touch these sliders at all. I'm going to try using the tool that Refine Edge has enabled by default. It's called the Refine Radius tool, and it's a godsend for selecting hair. I'll just hover over to my canvas and adjust the size of the Refine Radius tool by using the bracket keys on my keyboard. Hitting the left bracket key will make it smaller, and hitting the right bracket key will make it bigger. In this case, I want to make the tool bigger, so I'll use the right bracket key. So my method for using this tool will be to click and drag it over the areas that I don't want to be selected. So I can start here with this background on the left, and I'll just click and drag it along the edge of the hair, trying not to overlap onto the hair itself too much. And when I release my Refine tool, you can see that the visible selection changes accordingly. Now it's focusing more on the hair and less on the background. The more that I click and drag with this tool, the more the selection will remove and refine. I'll just go ahead and continue using this tool, clicking and dragging in the areas that I want to be deselected. And once again, I can always press and hold the Alt or Option key to invert my selection on the fly. This can be extremely useful for fixing mistakes in my selection refinement. Okay, that looks pretty good. Definitely much better than my previous selection using just the Quick Selection tool. I'll go down to the bottom of my Refine Edge dialog box and make sure that Output 2 is set to Selection. Then I'll click OK. It may take just a few seconds to load. And there we go. Now my refined selection is active on my current layer. But this tutorial isn't just about selecting hair. It's also about retouching hair. So in this case, I think I'd like to try changing the color of this hair. So I'll go down to the bottom of the Layers panel, click my Adjustment Layer button, and select a black and white adjustment layer. What this has done is create a new black and white layer while using my active selection to define the layer's mask. Now that the hair has been made black and white, I can more easily see what areas of the hair have been selected. And I'm seeing just a few areas of the selection that I'd like to be adjusted. So I'll go to the Layers panel and click the Layer Mask to isolate my selection. Then I'll select my brush tool in my Tools panel, and I'll just use my brush tool to sort of refine my selection. Now you may not need to take this step at all. It could be that your selection came out perfectly. The fact is that mine just isn't quite how I want it. But since I'm using masks, that means that I have complete freedom over how I'd like the hair to be adjusted. So I'm going to take advantage of this freedom by perfecting my mask with my brush tool. Again, my goal is to make sure that only her hair is affected by the adjustment layer and nothing else. Okay, that looks pretty good. The hair that I want to affect is black and white, while the rest that I don't want to affect is still in color. I'd like to apply a tint of color to the hair. So I'll double click my black and white layer to open up my available options. Then I'll go up and click the box next to Tint to apply color to my black and white layer. By default, Photoshop wants to use this sort of light brownish color. This is fine, but I'd like to use this opportunity to change the color of the hair in a more dramatic way. So I'll click the Tint Color swatch to bring up my color picker. And I'm going to go ahead and choose a nice medium red for my color. And when I'm done, I'll click OK. And there we have it, a beautiful hair color adjustment that I can manipulate as much as I like. So in this tutorial, we learned how to make a very easy hair selection. We learned how to use Refine Edge to improve that selection. We learned how to use masks to perfect our selection. And finally, how to use adjustment layers to change the color of the hair non-destructively. That will do it for hair selecting and retouching. I'll begin going over an extension for Photoshop called Adobe Lightroom in the next video.